In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.
You might remember Memphian coach Bill Courtney from the Oscar-winning documentary Undefeated. Now, he's got an awesome movement and podcast called An Army of Normal Folks that you can check out at normalfolks.us.
I'm Eric Barnes with the Daily Memphian, and welcome to The Sidebar, a weekly show on the community, arts, culture, and more. Today, we're very pleased to be talking to Lora Chilton. She's author of the new novel, 1666, a novel. So stay with us for a conversation with Lora. And a special thanks to our sponsor, Youth Villages. Lora, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Eric.
We are back after a bit of a break, I think. I was out of town a lot, so we're back. Natalie Van Gundy, our producer, was out too. So we're back with the show we're recording this week. Your novel, real briefly, and then we'll talk more about it. But, what your quick synopsis of the novel, and then we'll come back.
Well, 1666, a novel, is the story of the survival of the Patawomecks tribe in Virginia. So they, in 1666, the colonial government, if you will, decided to destroy the village by murdering all the men, burning the village, and selling the women and children into slavery. Oral tradition of the tribe holds that from there, after the selling, 2 or 3 women made it back, and from that, the tribe survives to this very day.
Yeah.
So it's the story of the tribe's survival.
And your roots trace back to the tribe, to your father.
Yes, my ancestry is to the Patawomecks, and I can trace it back to Chief Wahanganochi, who was chief in the 1600s.
Again, we'll talk more about the book and the difficult topic and all that. You wrote a column for us this week. It came out, I think, Monday, because I have no sense of time, which I appreciate. So thank you. And people can go to Daily Memphian and see the column about some of this and just the history of the horrible history of Native Americans. Why do this before we go into the deeper into the book, it's fiction. What historical, and it's historical fiction. And so for people who maybe haven't read historical fiction, what does that even mean when they say this is historical fiction?
So it's grounded in a time and place. So this particular historical fiction takes place from about 1666 to 1672. And when we call it historical fiction, it means some of it is actually true. It's the actual history. And it's based on written records from that time, and then the oral tradition of the tribe. So we don't have conversations that were recorded at that time from the tribe. They didn't have a written language that we know about. What we have is documents from early explorers and settlers, and as they observed the tribe and interacted with the tribe.
You're from Memphis, though.
I've been in Memphis a long time.
Yeah, okay. Oh, yeah. I say I'm from Memphis when I have been in Memphis a long time. It's your second book?
It is my second book, but yeah. It's my first published historical fiction.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Came out in April, is that right? In the spring at some point? And I should mention, people can get the book at Novel, they can get it at Burke's, they can order it online from the usual places as well. You first heard about, I think, this survival story at a family reunion, right? Back like in 2007. Do I have that right?
So for a long time, I didn't know about my Native ancestry. And one night at dinner, my dad just very casually, I'd gone back to visit them from Memphis. He just very casually mentioned his Indian grandmother. And
and roughly how old are you when this? You're an adult.
I was 48.
See, this is what dads do.
Yeah. And it was like, full stop, Daddy, wait, back up. And, I was like, wait, I distinctly remember being in 4th grade and doing an ancestry project or a heritage project, and you saying we were mostly, Irish and English. I was like, what? And so it kind of unfolded that evening over the next 3 hours through dessert and coffee and just sitting and talking. And for context, he was born in 1935. And in 1924, the Virginia legislature had passed the Racial Integrity Act, which had eliminated Indians from any birth registry or wedding registry. because it was a eugenics movement, a piece of a eugenics movement. And the feeling in Virginia was that all the black people had mixed with all the Indian people and there were no more Indians. So at that point, you had to be black or white. You literally had to be black or white. So records were destroyed. And my father remembered being told, so when he went to first grade, your teacher will ask you if you're an Indian, you have to say no. And then if you get called to the principal's office, the principal might trick you, ask you again, are you an Indian? You have to say no. So at age 6, he just internalized all that. And the reason was because he was going to a white-only school.
That's where I was going.
Yeah.
Yeah, I assumed as much. It is horrific to think that was only 100 years ago.
Yes. It's shocking. And it didn't get repealed until 1967.
Yeah, that's even more shocking. So you find out at dinner.
Yeah.
And you then go, did you kind of go in a journey of discovery to try to piece all this together?
Well, he just was, by then he had already, officially joined the tribe, and he was like, just laid it all out there. And we were just like, oh my goodness. And there are 4 siblings, and we were all very interested in it and finding out more about our roots. And then also looking back at things that had happened and conversations we had had as children that pointed to some of this heritage, but had never been identified as, belonging to the Patawomecks tribe. But we did the next year, I guess, or in 2 years, the chief at that time was Chief Two Eagles Green. And he came to our family reunion and just sat with us and told us the whole oral tradition. So my dad hadn't really shared that. I don't know if he knew it. And then I started, and I said to Chief Two Eagles Green, I want to read that book. Where's that book? What's the name of that book? And that wasn't a book. And so I just kept exploring and reading every other book I could find. And then finally, over years, literally years, this feeling of bubbling up that the women's story needed to be told. And then that Toni Morrison quote, if there's a book you want to read, but it hasn't been written, you must be the one to write it. So at some point, I just felt like writing it.
Yeah. Again, we're here with Lora Chilton, the Memphis author. Her new novel is 1666, a novel. Do you mind me asking, what was it in your father's life that got him to a point where he suddenly wanted to embrace this and talk about it? Was it an evolution? Was it a moment? Do you know?
I don't know if it was age, maybe, or maybe he felt safe enough to talk about it. The tribe had been underground for many, many years and not talked about because, after all, they were supposed to be destroyed.
Yeah.
They weren't supposed to be in existence. They had never signed treaties giving away any of their land, which was part of the reason for the massacre. And so they had, when the tribe survived, had sort of lived with other tribes because all the tribes in Virginia were under attack. And so I guess in some ways, maybe he felt it was safe to talk about it. And he had been sick, and maybe he just wanted to tell it at last.
Yeah. And that's great that he did. It does, people who find out they have slaves in their family, they have these things, and, family reunions, and there's more and more of that, I think, the Ancestry.com stuff, all this kind of stuff, that the accessibility of all these records and so on has increased dramatically. Were there people in your family who are a little not happy? Or you don't have to name names here, but you know what I mean? It's a strange dynamic. To realize that thing that you didn't know.
I think everybody in my immediate family was interested. I don't know if happy. I felt happy to know about this, and I think mostly happy, but also just interested. There wasn't a negative for us, any kind of pushback, but I know that does happen and did happen because there is deep-seated racism about why now? Yeah. Why talk about this now? Why are you bringing this up now? Why do you want to be identified now?
Right. Why are we reliving this thing that happened so long ago?
Yeah, this is a hard story. This is terrible what happened. Why do we want to bubble it back up?
Right. My own family, my father's side particularly, a terrible relationship with his father. So he knows very little beyond that. But some of my cousins and now my niece are really, really into the ancestry thing. And so I'm super interested. I've never been all that curious to find out, but my niece is really into it. So I'm waiting for some sort of letter, of just like, here's the family secret. It's like, oh, great. Okay. That's really hard to know, but it hasn't happened yet. The writing of the book, well, let's talk more about in the book. I asked you to give the quick version. It's historical fiction. It's grounded in this reality. You created characters. You based them to some degree on characters you could piece together. I mean, it's not just a book of history. There's a plot and there are characters and all that. So where is that grounding of those characters? And describe the plot beyond the basics and the kind of horror that you just described.
Well, as I was trying to learn more and more about the story, I would just had to imagine what would it have been like to be living in this time in the 1600s, in the 1660s, in their life. They were settled along the Potomac River, fishing and farming, but there was movement. But it was a life where their housing could, decay and go back to the earth, and they'd build new housing. And so imagining what their life was like, foraging and hunting, what the women did with childbirth. And then to imagine being taken from there to the Caribbean, Barbados, and working on a sugar plantation. And so I started to look into Barbados and just the shock of what that was. So there are a lot of historical records about what was happening in Barbados in the 1660s, and it was called Little England. It was just this hugely decadent, wealthy party place, and it was all funded by the North and South American and African slaves, but people who were escaping persecution, people who were trying to get rich, and it was like just this really interesting melting pot. And so I imagined or tried to put myself in the place of the women, like what would it have been like to be there after living in this more primitive, if you will, life, and then move to Little England. How did that play out? And there were times, Eric, that I wanted to wrap it in a bow, like they got there and they both got bought by really nice plantation owners, and then they got shipped back first class on a jet plane and everything was cool, but it wasn't that way. And slaves were not treated that way. And so imagining also that families were broken apart, they wouldn't have been together, the two best friends or the three best friends, and how did that play out and what did that look like? And then how brave did they have to be to get back?
Yeah.
So that's sort of how the story goes. Like their lives diverge. We hear from the women in their own voices. I use native names to honor the culture and the language that's been lost. I took Patawomecks lessons, language lessons.
Oh, wow.
Online through Zoom during the pandemic. So there are a couple of things that happened that were really helpful when I was trying to research for the book. And the pandemic happened. So the tribe began to offer language classes online, language and culture classes. And I took the children's class because I felt like that was my speed. And I could also see my granddaughters online. Yeah. So they were in North Carolina. So on Sundays, we would have language class together. And that was really neat. But it also made me very determined to honor the work of the tribe currently and what had been saved of the language. And so I used indigenous names for the women. So Asaway Watapa'antam is golden fawn. And we shortened it to Asaway because there was a feeling that readers would stumble over Asaway Watapa'antam. And then the other characters, Napawe Show, Golden Moon. And I feel I've gotten a lot of positive feedback from using those names, from using indigenous words. And I think what I've heard is people like to learn something new.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's part of the historical fiction, right? You can engage if you think of a history book as being dry, and not all history books are, but this way you're engaged in that history and a whole story and the people and the characters. But I should remind everyone, as I do this housekeeping, I'm Eric Barnes, and this is The Sidebar. It airs on WYXR 91.7 every Thursday at 11:30. Focused on the community, arts, culture, everything in between. It's not just a radio show, of course. It's one of many weekly podcasts we do at the Daily Memphian, including the politics podcast from On the Record from Bill Dries. It's kind of one-off as Bill gets somebody lined up. We also do a weekly Grizzlies podcast with Drew Hill and Chris Harrington. And there's our food podcast, Soundbites. That also airs, besides being a podcast, it also airs on WYXR every Thursday at 11. And we also produce the podcast version of Behind the Headlines, the TV show we produce with the folks at WKNO every week. That's also in our podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts. So that's iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, on the Daily Memphian site. The WYXR ones are also at WYXR.org or on the WYXR app. You can also get all the shows from WYXR, Music and Talk, archives of those shows on the app or on the website. I should also note WYXR is nonprofit, listener-supported radio, so you can become a member. You can do a one-off donation. If you become a member, you get all kinds of benefits. You just go to the website and learn about that. And also, just a reminder, the Daily Memphian which just had its 6th anniversary, which is insane. 6 years, 7.5 years for me, but 6 years since launch in September. And if you haven't become a paid subscriber, do consider becoming one. We are the largest newsroom in the area. We are a nonprofit as well, and we have a fundraising campaign going on to help pay the bills. That makes it sound, whenever I say pay the bills, makes it sound really kind of like, whoa, they're struggling to pay the bills. We're not struggling to pay the bills, but at the same time, we love your donation. Everyone's got bills. Everyone's got bills. So yes, we are a nonprofit newsroom. We are still here with Lora Chilton talking about her book, 1666, a novel. Let's talk a bit about writing and your process. And this obviously involved, you talked about a huge amount of not just research, but of learning. So there's that. But in terms of the writing, like how long were you writing? Do you write in coffee shops? Do you write in a dark basement? Do you write, all that kind of stuff that I think people, at least some people, me included, are interested in.
Well, it took me about 3 years to write 1666, a novel. I had written another novel, historical fiction, that had taken about 10 years. And then I was in the process of trying to query it out and find an agent. And no one seemed very interested in it. And as I was doing that, I concurrently was like, but I really want to write this. I'm going to stop querying and I'm going to start writing 1666. And it took about 3 years. I write at my house. I can't focus. I'm one of those who can't focus in a coffee shop, or if I'm even outside, if I'm in a park.
Yeah.
But if I'm outside in my yard, I can focus because it's just a very tunnel vision. So that's how it goes for me. And I have to have it quiet. I know the younger generation can listen to music and have the TV going and while they write, but I just get really focused and tunnel visioned. I'd like to say I sat down every morning at 8 o'clock and walked for 3 hours and then got up and had lunch, but it's kind of all over the map that way. But I consider I'm working on a project or writing when I'm researching and taking notes or trying to hash it out. So even if it's not actually writing the narrative, taking notes or thinking, I consider that a part of the process.
Sure, yeah. And for people, querying is querying your sentence. So in my other life, I write books and I've published 4 novels and I've written more than that. So I feel your pain in the whole process of querying, where you're basically taking your 2 to 3 to 10 years of work and boiling it down into a couple of paragraphs. And now most of it's by email, but not everybody, but most of it's by email. And you're sort of hammering agents to try and get their attention and try to then get them to ask, or maybe you've sent 50 pages. Everybody has these different rules about how they do it. You're trying to get them to read a little more. And then you go through all these agents, and then eventually you get one, and then they start shopping it. And it is literally the world's slowest process. It could not be, it's just painfully slow. But you were working on this. It sounds like the querying and the agent and the publishing was really relatively quick.
Well,
maybe I'm being optimistic.
Well, no, it's quicker than the first one that never got a publisher.
Yeah.
But the way, so I got it done, I guess, and then you're constantly fine tuning and editing even as you start the querying process. You feel like you can send the first 50 pages out if it was finished, but I was maybe fine tuning it. But I'd read about a woman who wrote a book and sent it out 47 times. And she got 47 no's, and on the 48th, she got an agent. So I'd said to myself, don't get discouraged. So when I started sending out 1666, I was like, get to 48 before you get discouraged. So I got to 48, and then I just said to myself, why are you going to stop now? And people in the meantime had said, you should start entering chapters into contests, or, do this, do that, or go to publishers directly. So I'd kind of tweaked what I was doing. But I reached out to Sibylline Press on my 58th attempt. And so they were interested.
Yeah.
So that was pretty cool. And so shocking after 57 tries to open up the email with somebody saying, we really like your book. Send us more. We want to know more.
Yeah. It's absurd. People, when I tell, back, I don't write or submit short stories anymore, but back when I was very actively doing that, I used to have the number, but it's something like, and this was over 40 short stories and another 10 that never got published, but I think it was a couple thousand rejections. And when I started writing, it was all by mail. And so I'd come home, and one of the humiliating things about, especially with short stories, but back in the day before internet, now I'm doing old guy stuff, when you were mailing, sample chapters, and then you would include in it. I remember telling somebody this, and they stared at me and they said, this can't be real. I go, yeah, you sent your own envelope, self-addressed with a stamp on it so they could reject you. You had to pay for your own rejection. And I tell people that, and they're just like, what? And I was like, that's just normalized. It's just a broken industry. But I'm still not sure it's all that. I guess it's cheaper and faster with email, but it's still a very slow process.
Yeah,
but it's not for the faint of heart.
It's not. And you have to just be very determined, I think, to tell a story, which is how I ended up being with this, like a dog with a bone. I'm going to tell the story. I'm going to tell this story. But I also felt, and nothing against self-publishing, I just felt like also I wanted it to be compelling enough that somebody would read it and feel like it needed to be told, too. I wanted to be able to write it or have it written so that it would be of interest.
Yeah.
I just didn't want to write it and have it as my own little thing.
Right. No, I think I was talking to somebody the other day who was asking me about, they've got an idea for a book and they're talking about self-publishing. I said, look, there are certain types of books that can work for, but it's incredibly limiting. You just, because, and the whole thing of it, and I'm ranting, but the whole thing about publishing is the fundamental problem from a business point of view is it takes a really long time to read a book. So you can only have so many people at the publishing house or at the literary agency who can read these books. So they got to read a couple paragraphs, and then they might get a couple pages. But before that, they're going to kind of look, have you been published before? And they don't want to deal with anybody who hasn't been published before, but you can't be published before if you haven't been published. And that's just to get to the agent. And then they have to do the same process with the publishers who are, except for certain types of books, very small staffed, always stretched thin. Every editor of any has got a bunch of manuscripts on their desk, 300 pages each, that they have to read completely before they even want to give it to other editors or people in the company. So it's just inherently slow. It's just, unless, again, there's certain types of fiction and certain types of nonfiction that, can be done quicker. That's fine. But for you're putting this thing together, the kind of work that I've tried to do at least, it's just inherently slow. My saying that is me talking myself down from the ledge.
As well, you should.
Yeah, I have a book out there with my agent that is slowly marching its way through publishers, right now.
Well, once I connected with them, and that was probably in January of 2023, February, it started to move fast.
That's pretty fast.
And they wanted, so by the time I signed a contract with them, they were already looking at spring of 2024. And it was like, keep going,
that's
baby, keep going,
too.
Keep going.
Yeah.
And they're a new publishing company. It's created by 4 women who came together who had years in the industry, and then got to a certain age and felt like women of a certain age weren't being heard, especially if they'd never been published before. And, the publisher had sold a publishing business, or she's they were all extremely experienced, but were getting really discouraged about what they were seeing.
Yeah.
And so and they've been wonderful, but they were like, we're hopping to, we got a timeline, this is what we're doing. And so it's been great working with them.
And it's Sibylline.
Sibylline
Press publishes the work of brilliant women of over 50 exclusively, which I thought was really great. I was looking it up before we started doing this. We're almost out of time. People can learn much more about the book, about you. You can just Google Lora Chilton. You've got a great website with all kinds of info about where to buy the book. You can buy it locally at Burke's and at Novel. You can buy it online. Question I always ask people, what was your first concert?
My first concert, Andre Crouch
Andre
and
Crouch.
the Disciples
Wow.
in Baltimore.
In Baltimore. Nice. There we go. That is a first. Lora Chilton, thanks very much, and congratulations on the book.
Thanks so much.
That is all the time we have this week. If you missed any of the episode, you can go to wyxr.org, you can go to Daily Memphian, you can go to wherever you get your podcasts and get the full episode. That includes iTunes, Spotify, YouTube. That is all the time we have, though. Thanks very much, and we'll see you next week.